we going boy, girl, boy, girl? I thought we were going boy, girl, boy, girl.
You can go any way that you want. I promise.
you.
I promise it'll all be very friendly. Thank you so much for all of you still sticking around at this late time of day. Normally we lose lots of people in those last sessions, so I'm going to base it on the fact this panel's pretty amazing, and I've certainly got lots to offer in terms of insights. I'm actually going to start with you. Can I call you Dan?
Please.
Is that okay? Okay, fantastic. Dan, tell me a bit about Trade Investment Queensland, because I understand that a lot of the investments and a lot of the businesses that you work with, about 85% of them actually have less than 5 employees. Tell me about what that's like.
Yeah, so Trade Investment Queensland is Queensland's global business agency. So we have an onshore network of 8 regional offices plus Brisbane. And we've got an offshore network which covers 15 markets, 16 offices and 15 markets. So that's the crux of it. And for us, it's primarily at the moment, it's a people business. It's about those connections. What does it mean in a state where there's 97% of small businesses? It means when a part of the challenge is around scale. Queensland as an export state, frankly, we export a narrower range of product to a narrower range of market than any other state in Australia. That actually reflects in some part the capacity that our small businesses have. So part of the journey we're going through is how we can scale up a service offering that actually will enable some of those small businesses to draw it down when they need it, as opposed to when we think they need it.
And it's interesting that that assumption factor comes up again. Ash, you talked a lot about empathy and the idea that there are going to be really difficult personalities in a room. And that sort of piqued my interest, because I thought, you know, for the people in this room that are designing policies and they are designing procedures and, you know, as Dan has said, you know, trying to get to smaller businesses that might need to scale, how do you manage those difficult personalities in a room? What does that look like from a human-centred design perspective?
Yeah, good facilitation. What it often comes down to is finding that shared value, because, you know, as I mentioned, passing things down the line, people lose the intent of why you're doing this in the first place. If you can have people in the room at the same time and everyone understands what's the purpose, what's the intent, then you can have better conversations. But not only that, I think it was mentioned earlier today, it was mentioned a couple of times actually, building those relationships. So councils, like any organisation, can become large and siloed. And if you can have a good relationship across those silos that's not just working relationship, if you can have the morning teas, if you can have the social connections, if you can try and build empathy for the other people in the room. We were talking, I was talking last night, and it was mentioned that sometimes an event is put forward and then the permits people will block it, even though, you know, everyone has the same intent. They want to protect the small businesses in an area. Permits people are just doing what they normally do. They're trying to protect those small businesses because they don't want an event blocking it, even though that event was to help those small businesses. So there's the shared intent there. If you can get that out and then work together to figure out the best way forward, then it's easy. It's common sense.
It should be common sense, shouldn't it? Tracy, I'm just going to label you as the queen of AI, you know, whether that's for the purpose of this panel or moving forward. But, you know, technology, I guess, inherently feels a little bit colder to those that, you know, may not be used to sort of engaging. How do you bring the shared views to the table when trying to get people to adopt new technology? You know, how do you create that, you know, empathetic relationship that we see Apple create with their products? What does that look like?
People. It has to start with the people and end with the people. So whenever you're designing anything, whether it's a policy or an app or, you know, as we move towards multimodality, which means that we can interact with AI now with voice or video or any of those types of things. It's getting back to that human-centered design. So why are we doing this? Who's it benefiting? And often I think when a new technology comes out, so like I said, I've been doing this for 30 plus years, something new comes out and there's this race to find ways to use it without looking at, but why? So it's always got to come back to the, but why? Like, why are we trying to do this? Is it to make interactions with council streamlined from a small business perspective? Fantastic. Now we've got our why, we start from there. Yeah.
And is that sort of how Trade Investment Queensland approaches things in terms of, what is the business's why? Is there a need to scale, or is it sort of a means to an end in the sense that, the organisation itself is obviously looking to become global, to highlight those incredible small businesses? How do you take a small business owner that's incredibly protective of their product and then, almost expand them to global horizons?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think moving beyond Trade Investment Queensland, I always go for the phrase, try the why. And I think listening to Ash and Tracy earlier, for me, one of the things that I like is storytelling. And one of those points that I always come back to, I was working in London, it was a secure space, and there's a conversation about, we need all the space we can get for some people. I remember cycling into work that day, and there's a book that you had to sign. And the people were saying, there's a whole room of these books, why can't we use that for people? No, you need to sign this book every day. So I said, why? And it turned out that book had been there since 1939, and it was introduced in World War II, because when people cycled into work, they got an extra petrol ration. So in 2009, there was a bloody big room full of these books. Now, in terms of the theory of human-centered design, I just found that like a way of bringing to life the need to, I guess, make sure you understand the problem before you propose the answer. And I think with trade and investment agencies, that's where that individual client relationship is absolutely so important. And I put that alongside a suite of digital tools that help, like export readiness and things like that. Because I think one of the most dangerous things that an agency like TIQ can do is to think that you understand where a business should look before you understand the business.
So you're one of those lone nuts that Townsville talked about. Did you have another nut come and stand with you when you asked about the book, or did it cause some friction?
Sorry, say that again.
About the book in the 1939 when you were saying, why are we doing the book? Did someone else come and stand with you and ask and join in, or was it a harder nut to crack? No,
it's relatively simple, I think, on that one. Obviously the story's right, it's not quite, but I think, for me, probably a harder one has been more recently in TIQ, where my team's actually started our AI journey. And we were talking about it earlier, and again, I'd say sometimes we kind of affirm, but we don't actually test and learn. And by that, it's like, everyone uses AI every day, as we've said, and yet one part of Queensland government was saying, no, we can't use it. And your example there about local councils was so striking for me, because literally 2 months ago, we were going through the same sort of process. So I actually brought in another part of Queensland government, the AI hub, to speak to another part of Queensland government about, yes, you can use AI. Do you know what? You just need to understand how and begin to put in place a framework and to do some simple steps. So from a position 3 months ago, the answer is no. We're now in a position where, from my business planning, I've handed back 500,000 a year on the basis of we can now use AI tools to do something that we were outsourcing. So it's kind of understanding, I guess, different approaches to it.
And Ash, what's the best example of implementing something that is digital and might feel cold, or you might feel the risk is there by simply putting it in place, that's had a benefit in terms of the human interaction with it? I mean, you must come across lots of different technology that's worked really well and then others that haven't. What's a good example?
That's an interesting question. Good example of technology. There are millions of them. I mean, the iPhone was just a revelation, and the defining vision behind this. It was changing something from, this is a communications device, this is your telephone. We're going to give it a touch screen and we're going to connect it to the internet. When Steve Jobs brought that out, the vision behind it was entertainment in your pocket. That's it. It was nothing to do with the phone. And so they were able to put everything from the iPod in there. You get all your music. And he asked the question, why not video? It wasn't possible, but they made it possible. And if you have that defining vision, you can keep striving toward it. So, yeah, I think the iPhone has changed society. After the iPhone, everyone else came in and copied it, and smartphones enabled so many things in so many societies. You see complete jumps in some societies. Like I was in Africa probably about 8 years ago, and seeing how phones were being used, smartphones and feature phones, for the unbanked. People didn't have banks, they couldn't afford to have banks, but were using their phones to do banking by swapping credit on phones. And that's blossomed into a massive industry in Africa. So yeah, smartphones, I think, are amazing technology.
It's interesting, we've heard lots of people discuss today sort of this hesitancy around, making a change, moving from manila folders, obviously the book in that case. Tracy, what would you say to those people that are thinking about embarking on something that is a little bit different, and where should they start?
Find the pain point. Whenever I talk to a small business owner, and I'm no different, like there's always one thing that is just sticking out that you keep coming back to and go, oh my God, if I could just get this sorted. Now, I have ADHD, right? So give me a 5-minute task, I'll make it last 3 months. Because I just don't want to do it. And then when you finally do it, you go, oh, that was 5 minutes. But it's usually those recurring things that you're like, oh, have I got to do this again? Have I got to do this again? So if you can find that trigger, that if you pull that and fix that, you get X time back, or, you don't need to do that ever again because you can automate it or whatever that is. That's usually the thing. So I get people to create a matrix or a to-do list, like write your to-don't list. You've got your to-do list of the things that you like doing. What's your to-don't list? This is the stuff I don't like doing. If you can't outsource it or you can automate it in some way, what's the number one thing that if you fixed right now would have a big impact? Don't pick 2, don't pick 3, don't go for 5, because we all try and overachieve and we're going to go, oh, well, I've got a list of 10, so I'll narrow it down to 3. You'll do nothing. Pick one thing, get that bit sorted, and then reprioritize and go, okay, well, what's my next big thing? Tick that off. And
for many of the people in this room, they have to propose this, new concept or new idea to, whether it's a board or whether it's, a council or whatever it is. Dan, you said you saved $500,000. I mean, that is obviously going to be very attractive to those people that you're pitching to.
It's also very attractive to the small business owner sitting on stage trying to help small business owners across Queensland. Send it my way, my friend.
Wish it was mine.
What would you say is the best way to approach a big change like that? To a group of people that may have never considered it or don't even know that they've got a problem that they should be trying to fix.
From my perspective, it's you can't own a whole. I think that's one of the things that strikes me about human-centered design. I like the concept of little changes to head towards a much bigger issue or a bigger problem. I always feel like there's normally, if you try and solve everything at once, it sounds a bit harsh. This is why I do get called Daniel, but it just gives a shed load of excuses for people not to do anything, which in government is fabulous. So I've worked government, not-for-profit and private. And actually, I think private's the same when you get to a similar scale, the size of an organisation probably. But for me, it's that bit about, okay then, so do you know what? We are not going to become the experts in AI overnight. But if the issue is you're scared about us releasing government data towards AI, all right, let's put that on the table then. Do you know what? We're not going to engage with that at all. we're going to use open source and bring that in. Don't get me wrong, the second stage is about how we then plug in an AI tool to our own CRM and then begin to link the two. But before I freak you all out, let's just get you all comfortable with this little bit and just have a couple of people in, because obviously you might not listen to me, but there's a couple of people you will. Listen to them, talk about it. And hey, do you know they work for Queensland Government too? So it's that bit about, I think sometimes small changes lead you towards massive and big changes, but allow you to do it in just a more sort of graduated way. That kind of perhaps reflects the risk appetite. There might be a chance to do something bigger, but understand the risk tolerance.
It's interesting because, Paul Martins from Moreton Bay talked about, what's your, sort of power source in the sense of, what are you going to wave around to get people to buy in? How important are champions in that sense? And how would you best categorise a champion in your organisation? Do they need to be of a certain level? Do they need to be an expert? What does that look like?
I think often consultants like myself are relied upon when they shouldn't be relied upon. So I'm often brought in because someone wants something to happen and no one's listening to them. So get the expert to say it, and then people will do stuff. I think that's rather wrong-headed. What I find is more effective, and I coach people on this within the organisations that I work on, is to actually, coming back to the empathy thing, find out what the big problem is. What are the barriers stopping people doing things, as Dan just said? What are those barriers? And then gather the evidence to say, okay, here's something, you come to your own conclusion on it. And if you can do that, you don't need a position of authority or anything. You let someone else come to the conclusion, and then they're the second follower to you being the lone nut, and you can actually get progress.
Tracy, what's the biggest barrier you've ever hurdled to get something moving? Has it been spend? Is it, a difficult personality? Is it someone that's never touched, technology and doesn't know what you're talking about? What is the biggest and hardest hurdle to get through?
It's usually their own limiting belief, to be honest, and everyone has their own. So it's being able to recognise when you're in a room, is that an actual problem or is that a perceived problem? Because we can separate that. And I think, it's helpful sometimes being, I call it neurospicy, so having ADHD and autism, I don't think like a lot of regular people. So I'm constantly coming at stuff. I was that annoying kid going, but why? Like, why can't that work? Like, that should just work. Why isn't it? Why can't we do it this way? And I didn't fit in a corporate environment because I was that person always pushing up against the barriers. So now I look for those people when I go into an organisation, because they're the ones that will champion the work continuously, because they're the ones prepared to remove their own perceptions for the sake of the bigger program.
I think you also touched on something else that's important. Whenever you want any type of behaviour change and people have a self-limiting thought about it, you break it down into the smallest thing that they can do, the smallest thing that gives them traction. They get success out of it, and then they go, oh, I can do the next bit and the next bit.
Quick wins. Yeah.
It's that stretch though, right? It's what, Tara was talking about in terms of stretching them just a little bit further and a little bit further again. What's that like, Dan, in such a big organisation? How do you get them to stretch? I know you brought in, other government agencies which were sort of trusted that, you could lean on, but, once you start, how do you keep getting them to stretch and getting them to do better and driving it forward?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, one of the places that I always start is with myself, being completely honest. That each month we produce this beautiful performance pack that we send to our executive leadership team, and it's fantastic. And if you can't sleep, it will solve that absolutely nicely. And then, for the first 4 months I was doing the job, I'm like, why is no one reading this thing? Like, it's amazing. When you get to page 61, look what it tells you. I think we've all worked out what the problem there was. So I think for me as well, the thing that I try and instill in the roles that I'm in and the people that I work with is, let's look to ourselves first. And let's begin to question what we do. And if we do that, then I think you set an example, maybe even a peer example or an upward leadership example for others to follow. It sounds a lot more simple. But after some, pretty brutal self-critiquing, and someone's provided from elsewhere, which is, actually really helpful, what we just provide now is a couple of pages. Mm-hmm. And we try and pick on one thing. And actually, one of the things we've been talking about is, if you think about it from the perspective of a small business, is how do you engage with invested Southeast Asia, like this 400-page strategy, if you're producing one thing that at the moment you might be exporting by default? You supply a domestic market and then whatever gets left over might export. How do you take that and engage with something like that? Well, actually, one of the things that we'd then be talking about is, well, did you know that, from Australia's perspective, what you produce is something that, for example, Vietnam wants? Well, how do I connect there? Well, actually, let's have these conversations now, because TIQ's opened up an office in Vietnam. Let's have a conversation about what you do. Is it competitive? So again, it's beginning to simplify what we produce and to pick out just a couple of those core things. And it's still not something I'm great at, as you can tell from these long answers. So again, you critique yourself, and you gradually, bit by bit, you just, I think, help the people that you're supplying work in the way that you're trying to get them to work to.
So it's all about creating connection to whatever it is, whether it's the new technology, whether it's a new way of doing things, whether it's a new export. Ash, is there a secret sauce to creating connection? Because sometimes we're talking about, an online form for a planning department. Like, how do you create connection with the general population?
By actually understanding that the language that they use, that's the one biggest barrier. As I said in my presentation, every speciality, you have your domain of knowledge, you have your skills, you have your background. That's not shared with other people. So if you're council, you have your own language, and we all know government language is impenetrable. You have your own language, and if you can actually break that down and use plain English. I was part of a project at one of the banks that then scaled across banks about looking at the legalese that they were using and just saying, let's pare this down. Let's turn it into plain English. And there was big pushback because these are legal terms. They're very specific terms. We have to use them to meet the law. Actually, I've got a lawyer English major here. Let's work together with some other content writers and pare this down. And we took these massive documents, we turned them into plain English that everyone could understand, and it still met the requirements for the legal requirements. But now you had people that knew what they were signing up for. So yeah, just being able to use the correct language.
Tracy, I saw your ears prick up on that question, and I think you're absolutely right, Ash, in terms of language and things like that. But as someone who is neurodivergent, what else can you do to create connection? I mean, because language might not just be it, right? It could be medium, it could be all sorts of things.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of the things that my hubby kind of giggles about with me, because I read things quite literally. Right? So I have that moment of I'll read something or someone will say something to me and I have to give it a couple of seconds to filter through, because I'm quite sarcastic, and my literal brain will respond with a snap and then kind of go, oh, but hang on, like normal humans don't think that that's funny. Haha. So the thing that I was thinking about in that instance, we're at a point now where why do we have to even fill in the damn form? Like, the tech is there. We don't have to fill in the form. We could talk to it, or, it could be plugged into the systems that's already pulling the majority of the data like the Townsville example. You know, was it you that was saying that you ended up with all the drop downs, or was it Moreton Bay that ended up with the 16 categories and the drop downs and stuff? You know, that to me, like, all right, game on. Now I got something, I've just got to pick one of 16, like tick, 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 I'm done. Like, why are we still assuming we have to fill in a form?
And often that comes down to we've always
done that.
And we
LB 309, we have to do that.
And then you get to the question, why?
Yeah.
So you're asking these people, like I'm doing a job at the moment. Thankfully, they're all paper-based, and they're going through a digital transformation. And they said, okay, we're going to turn this paper into PDFs. No, you're not going to do that. What we're going to do is question why each piece of information. And I know that when you get this information, people then check it. What are they checking it against? Where's the origin of the data? So we took this massive form for finance and turned it into 4 or 5 questions. The first of them being, what's your ABN? Because everything's checked against that.
Yeah. We had, on that, we had last week I was in Scenic Rim and I was chatting to a tourism operator that was developing hikes through the national parks and things. And they said, we really struggle to engage families because the kids want to look at different things and blah, 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 blah. And I said, so with multimodality now, with ChatGPT and some of the AIs, get the kids to design the hike for you. So the kid can be in the back seat and, you know, take photos, or now talk to me like SpongeBob SquarePants and take me on a tour of the national park. And the operator was like, we can do that? Yeah, you can do that. And like, but that'd be out of our budget. No, it's probably going to cost you about $500 to set it up.
And it's free with Parrot AI.
Exactly, right? So, you know, it's back to that. Just because it's always been done that way doesn't mean we still have to. Sure, if you've got, you know, 90-year-olds like my mum, she still wants to, you know, that's her way, but, you know, we're going to have to change.
It's interesting because all of you strike me as disruptors. I don't know if you identify as being disruptive.
Hell yeah.
And I know we're talking about human-centric design, but, you know, the reality is it's almost as if digital has become yesterday's news, right? So now it's about, you know, community, and it's about, you know, social enterprise, and, you know, how are you connecting and what does that connection looks like? It leads me to sort of ask the question, do you think that's a product of becoming so hyper aware that community is important post-COVID, or do you just think naturally that's the evolution, or that's where we're heading? I'm sure Ash will have an answer to this based on evolution.
I think culture goes through these peaks and troughs. You know, the books were such an anathema. I got the word out. You know, people thought this technology was going to ruin the youth of the time. You know, we go through these clutching at the pearls moments when new technology comes around, but it gets us to reflect on ourselves, and often it gets back to the human bit. So we get so focused on new technologies and so hyped up about them that eventually it just comes to an inflection point. We look back to, what are we doing this for? You know, technology is something that is there to serve a purpose. It's not there as its own thing. So, yeah.
Look, my final question to all of you is, what's your top tip for improving digital service delivery from a human-centric design perspective? Looking at you, Dan.
I'd go for test and learn, but understand the problem. So to give an example on that, and sorry, what you've described there, I'm like a nodding donkey, just you phrase it very well. And the example I give is, we used to do a client survey in TIQ, and this is where I do get into trouble again. And we would survey those exporters who we'd offered a free service to at the point of their outcome to say, what did you think of the free service that we offered? And then we'd use that to say, hey, how great we were. That's not a client survey. That's not using client data. You're just affirming how great you are. Fine, I get it. It's in our sort of budget makeup as we have to get a certain percentage, fine, whatever. Don't confuse that with actually understanding what people think and how you can use that to drive and improve what you do. So be clear about what the question is you're trying to solve. Be clear about the problem. Actually, what we've now decided to do is we now speak to 500 exporters irrespective of whether they engage with us or not. And what we ask them is just a series of questions. And one of that is, what do you want from Trade and Investment Queensland? One of that was around a freight service, which we then stood up. So think about the problem, the questions that you're trying to ask. But also, if you ask, you must listen. Otherwise, people won't respond again.
For myself, it's understand the problem space. And probably the top tip of that is, make the time to map the journey. Everyone is trying to achieve the goal. You're there to support them achieving that goal. If you can map out that journey, then you can appreciate what's come before, what's going after, and you can make something that's damn useful for them. And you can see any root causes of both problems and opportunities. And that is a lot of power.
I've forgotten the question. I was having an ADHD
What's
moment.
your top tip? What's your top tip
Yes.
to improve digital service delivery via human-centric design?
I strongly believe, because everything is moving at such a speed right now, don't design for what you need now, design for what you think you need in 6 to 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're doing it now, it's out of date by the time it's implemented. So be thinking 6 to 12 months down the track. And be aiming for that, because it's going to take you a wee while to get it put in place anyway.
Great. Let's open it up to the floor for questions for our panel. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Just speaking of that rate of change, if you look at where we've come from in like 20 years, where do you see technology will be in another 20 years? What do you foresee?
So my mum is 90, my dad is 88, and they're in a room together in a residential aged care. And my dad said to me the other day something about retiring, and I said, I'm not going to have humans looking after me the way that you do now. I'm going to have robots, 100%. I think it's going to depend on how financially stable I am as to whether I have like the robot that walks in, falls over, and then I have to help it stand up again, but we're at a point now with wearable tech and devices that, it can read my heart rate, my blood pressure, blah, blah, blah. So when you saw the video that I played of Figure AI, it's not that big a stretch to think in 20 years' time we're going to have, I don't know if anyone's heard of Atlas from Boston Dynamics. If you haven't, YouTube it. Amazing work they're doing, and China's bringing out some amazing robotics as well. The next connection is robotics and AI. So then you're going to have bipedal robots that have access to all of your health data that you've given them. So, data, assume that that's a, thing that you've done, that will be able to come in and say, now, Tracy, I know you used to like playing with Lego in your 50s. Shall we build some Lego today? Or, you've got a doctor's appointment, or, you haven't spoken to your husband in 3 days. Like, it's all of that is kind of where we're headed. That would be by choice. I adore him.
Ash has got an answer to this.
I adore him. Yeah.
Tracy, something I think you'll love is I was over in Canada a couple of weeks ago at the TED conference.
Yeah.
AI was mentioned 330 times. The thing that has been progressing forward for the last couple of years and that I've heard over and over again is we've had AI for a long time. It's been in the
60s,
background.
yeah.
It's just been trickling away. Having an agent, someone that can respond to you, something that can respond to you in a meaningful way. We've been trying for that. I don't know if you've seen Apple's Navigator. It was a vision video done in the 80s. Having an agent like that, the big shift that's changed is we've had all the components for that. Now it works. That got you to a point of just something that can talk back to you. And everyone thought, well, that's great. It's going to be years before that progresses any further because AI doesn't understand the world around it. Well, at TED, there was, and ChatGPT's new multimodal GPT, everything, all the AIs are now pointing outwards and understanding the world around them. And that combined with robotics, yes.
Game on.
I can see that coming.
Game on. The one thing I will say, and I say this to all of my clients, be mindful of what data you're prepared to trade for convenience. Data is the new commodity, and we all do it. Like we all have our everyday rewards card and we go to Woolies or our Myer one and we don't think of it because it's convenient. But you know, only 2 weeks ago, I shared a story with my community about Slack has anyone used Slack in here? Yep. So Slack had retrospectively changed its terms and conditions to say that any user was now assisting Slack in training its AI data. So that meant it's sucking in all of your information, files, videos, images, text, everything to help train their system. Now, they didn't announce that, right? Why would they? Because then they're going to get a bunch of people going, I don't want to be a part of that. Take my data out of that. So it's incumbent upon all of us to find trusted communities. We heard about that all day, that we can look to that will share those stories with us. So then we're able to go, okay, well, do I want to opt out of that? Or am I okay with that? I think it's, you know, this informed consent and data for convenience is going to be a really big, for me, it's something I'm really mindful of.
And I'm assuming I'm the only reformed lawyer on the panel, but, you know, and I hate to bring up regulation or red tape, but of course we would want to see the regulation keep up, which is precisely the argument now that technology and AI is accelerating at such an exceptional rate that the laws and the protections around things like privacy and even
copyright,
being able to control AI and its views and ability to assess certain situations, there are some glitches there that need to be ironed out.
There's glimmers of hope too. I won't say many years ago, it was only a few years ago. I was working with the federal government. We pulled together something because data was being used without consent and it was obvious that data is the new value. And so we put together the consumer data right to get informed consent. Now, unfortunately, these things take a long time to roll out. This is applied to banks at the moment. The next step is telcos. And then it's going to go to your electricity. But this is all taking time. And in the meantime, AI is now, I'm going to steal all your data. But at least we've got to start in that. And I think one of the biggest areas to hit with that is health data. Because everyone's taking your health data and you are not the owner of your health data in Australia. It's one of the few places in the world where doctors own your data. You don't. You have a right to see it, but that's about it.
Dan, did you want to add something to that?
I'll just say a couple of things on that as well. And I think with AI, it's also a lot of the risks from AI exist in other things as well. So, you know, you look in terms of how it can be used. If you go back, I don't know if anyone's watched Oppenheimer, and you think about the development of that, and the concept of determinism was actually heavily discussed in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So, you know, a lot of science has moved quicker than the regulation. That's happened before. Obviously, with AI and the speed of it, it exacerbates. But you look at the EU, for example, they're just announcing a sort of cross-EU framework in terms of regulation of AI. So you're beginning, I think, to see a closing of the gap. And yes, it will continue to move on. But again, to kind of try and demystify it, I'd say, as a risk, it's not something that's completely new. The context within it is changing and moving quicker than ever before. But we can look backwards, I think, as well to learn, to help us move forward. I think the other thing as well, and being the non-reformed trade person in the corner, I'd also say, think about what it means for us and the things that we've got in Queensland as well. AI needs power. The transition to renewable energy or critical minerals alongside AI is going to be one of the challenges, not just for Queensland, but one of the key global challenges that we will have. And if you look at the power demand and sort of how that's extrapolated moving forward, I believe it took 100 years or something for the power demands to double. They reckon it will go up by 80% in the next 10 years. So in terms of what that means, one, it means the demand on traditional resources. We can see met coal demand going up at the moment. You probably wouldn't have thought that a couple of years back. Look at the global environment and what's happening there. And two, in terms of opportunities for Queensland, in terms of that pathway through to renewables, to critical minerals side of it, there's links here as well to areas where perhaps that you don't necessarily see.
Is there any other questions from the audience? Yes, Tim.
So how do we, in a human-centred world and design within our businesses, taking advantage of AI, make sure that we don't buy into whatever bias might be in the data set that we use?
Extrapolate the personal information, so remove that to begin with. So any gender, any age, names particularly, and remove that as a starting point, and make sure that you are involving the community. So First Nations, multicultural, gender, in looking at and providing insights. It was interesting years ago, Amazon, when they released Alexa, I don't know if you've heard about this, but the Alexa would only recognise male voices. And the reason for that was when they were trialling Alexa, there were no females working at Amazon that were able to go and be part of the test because they were doing it outside of work hours when the women were going home and taking care of their families, right? So just those small things of making sure that if you're looking to build a system, or, I think one of the areas that's going to assist quickly is HR and recruitment and things, just making sure you're removing that biased data that could. And what else?
And I guess I'd add a couple of things there as well from our own sort of journey is we actually use ChatGPT and Claude. So
Claude's great.
we actually try and set it up on the basis then we can actually do a bit of a compare and contrast, and you can learn between the different models. So it's a bit of a guardrail for us. The second piece that we've sort of set up alongside that is to be really clear about what sources that we want the AI to actually draw from. And it does that naturally, but you can also consciously set it yourself. So if you go through Google, it means, for example, that they would have to be, hit their qualification criteria, or you can even go to, some of the press agencies or what have you to say, we'll only draw from, say, Reuters or something like that. So there's a chance for you to, again, make those small, very secure is the wrong word, but small, stable steps at the beginning, which will help you feel a bit more in control of it.
The interesting thing on that with when you're creating those subsets is they've now figured out that if you ask the system, so whether it's ChatGPT, Claude, so Claude is Anthropic, if you're not aware of it, it's kind of the white hats of the kind of AI world at the moment. Excellent for creating content, like written words, whereas ChatGPT is really good with data models and things like that. But they've figured out now that if you ask the system to write the job descriptions, etc., that experiential data is as effective as training a model as giving it real life data. So get it to write 100 examples of a job description based on, various different things, and get it to create you 100 different job descriptions, and then feed that back into the system. And if you're uploading any previous JDs or any previous resumes or anything like that, be aware that it's just maths, right? Like, it's just looking for the next data point. So if you're feeding in that 1,000 resumes were blokes aged between 25 and 40, and I go and apply for that role, then it's going to spit me out because I don't fit that subset. So again, just look at what data you're feeding in to begin with.
I think critically as well, artificial intelligence was the name given to it in the 60s. Mm-hmm. It's not intelligent. It's a statistical model. It's a tool. If you think of it as a tool, you wouldn't automate any critical decision making that a tool does. So whenever there is a critical decision, a human needs to make it. This can make your job at making a decision easier, but don't let it make decisions.
Natural intelligence will always come back and screw something up.
But there's a point there. If we're talking about human-centered design, one of the key phrases we sort of applied is human in the loop. So anything that we're putting out in terms of external newsletters or content, it goes through human and fine. That brings in all the unconscious, or as I prefer to say, conscious biases that involves. But your point is absolutely right, which is if you're describing this now, you wouldn't call it artificial intelligence. You go from data to information to intelligence. That requires a lot of, I'd say, almost qualitative and human input to get you through that.
I call it deep thought.
Do we have any? We've got time for one more question. Does anyone else have a question? Yes.
I am obviously loving everything that we're talking about and I've been speaking about the last couple of days. I'm sitting here as myself, as a 30-year-old, but then I'm thinking about the region that I go back to and that I serve, an aging population. So coming back just to small business and AI, thinking about my mum that used to work in the Bureau of Statistics in the 80s as a data entry operator, which that role does not exist anymore. Talking about the high-level decision-making that doesn't happen through AI, but those lower-level, entry-level jobs that potentially won't exist anymore.
They won't.
What would you say to the small business owners and the changes in my region that might have that as a red flag that pops up about utilising AI or not having jobs?
Every time a new technology has come out, it's threatened the jobs of everyone. And guess what? It's created more jobs every single time. The Luddites wanted to get rid of all the machines. It created more industry. It created more jobs. When computers came about, it's the death of lots of jobs. But no, it's not. It creates new jobs. Yes, there's a period of transition. That period of transition is scary and difficult for people, but we always get through it.
And also, I would direct them to the Queensland Government's micro-credential in artificial intelligence as well, to help them understand it and to help them understand that they too can get time back, to give them some brain space so that they can think about scaling or think about doing that new and exciting project, because it is there to alleviate some of those pressures. So I think it's about how you sell it as well.
What region are you in?
Cassowary Coast region. So
Yep. Yep. Awesome. I was very impressed to see a cassowary come and say goodbye to me as I drove out. So I was very happy about that. It was the only thing I wanted. I spent an hour driving around trying to find one, and he was hanging out by the side of the road as I drove out. So I would say to you, ageing population and in business, find the thing that's pissing them off. I don't have time to do my marketing. I don't regularly post on social media because I don't have time or whatever. And then show them how they can, put a topic into ChatGPT, spit out 20 headlines, upload it into Canva, and do their week's worth of posting in half an hour. show them one quick win, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, what else can this do? Show them how to write a birthday card for their grandma, well, probably for their grandchild. Show them how to write a Christmas book for their grandkids. You know, show like one thing and they're off.
My favourite thing is getting them to write a song in the style of Taylor Swift about. It works. It's very clever.
That one thing, I think it's a great thing. My parents were so resistant to technology. Once I showed Mum that she could take photos with her iPhone, she was all over it. And then she got onto Facebook and oh my God.
Oh yeah, you're forever now going like, oh.
I think that's all we've got time for. Please join me in thanking our panel.